Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from BNSF Railway, moving our economy for 160 years. Harris Ranch Resort, providing Western hospitality and award-winning cuisine. The Wonderful Company, committed to growing a better world. Comcast, connecting people to the moments and experiences that matter most. Producers Dairy, nourishing one life at a time. And Fresno State Associated Students, Inc., students serving students. The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Cook Land Company and E&J Gallo Winery. From the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's 4 public universities, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Blake Zante.
Welcome to the Maddy Report. I'm Blake Zante, Executive Director of the Maddy Institute and host of the Maddy Report. Today we'll be discussing federal issues and in particular how they impact the San Joaquin Valley. Joining us to help us dive into some of these issues is Central Valley Congressman Jim Costa, representing the 21st Congressional District. Congressman, welcome to the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much, Blake. It's good to be on the Maddy Report, long associated with the Maddy Institute at Fresno State, our alma mater, Go Dogs. And Ken was a very good friend over the years, and we worked together and got a lot of good things done. So appreciate all the good work you do.
Well, thank you, and we definitely want to dive into some of that history later on in the program. But maybe let's start off with some of your recent legislative efforts. I know something that you've been really focused on is the Protecting Public Health Act, which you introduced in Congress, related to the Reedley Biolab that made a lot of headlines here locally and nationally.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that. You know, what is entailed in that legislation, and then how does it impact the San Joaquin Valley?
Well, I think we were all, horrified to hear that an illegal lab had been set up in a city in our valley. Reedley's a wonderful community with its community college, but this illegal lab had all sorts of pathogens that were very, very harmful, whether we're talking about such things as COVID, AIDS, other kinds of toxins that, if unleashed, would create devastation. And for months, the city of Reedley and its city manager, once the city inspector discovered through a water outlet that this illegal lab was operating with over 1,000 laboratory mice without the proper permitting. They were trying to get attention by the local and state and federal officials, and with not much success, and they called our office, and we got on it that day. And the good news is that we got immediate response at the local level with the county, along with the state and federal officials. But in doing so and closing the lab up and trying to ensure that all of these potentially toxic pathogens were contained, we discovered that there was no agency at the federal level that had their singular responsibility to monitor this, nor on the state level. And we also learned that this person that had invested and set up this lab had done so in Canada and had done so illegally, and then also in I believe it was Colorado. And he had actually had a lab here, and money was funneling from China to deal with this. So we worked together on a bipartisan basis to form this legislation that in the future will try to ensure what the federal responsibility is for oversight, to ensure that you need more than simply a business license to open up a laboratory that has so many potentially harmful substances to a local community without any oversight. That's the bottom line. And so other communities in the future will be protected.
Well, certainly it's important because we are the agricultural hub of the San Joaquin Valley. And, it's certainly a target for, maybe foreign adversaries who are looking at the United States. That kind of transitions to our next question. Talk a little bit about the Farm Bill, if you could, and your role in some of the House agriculture legislation that's moving through right now, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about that.
One other point that I need to make on the legislation, it creates a public health and a biosecurity team, so that in future instances, we hope not, that if a community had such a problem, they would have an appropriate agency to call and to deal with. The Farm Bill is one of the more bipartisan pieces of legislation we deal with. It's reauthorized every 5 years. And I think it is America's safety net for farmers, ranchers, dairy men and women, our farm workers, and for 41 million people in America that are sadly food insecure. These are people that may be elderly, may be young, people with disabilities. Some of them are seasonal workers that have 4 or 5 members in a family and don't have enough time to put food on their table. And so the SNAP program is very important. We passed the bill out of committee last week. We're trying to get the bipartisan traction on the House floor. We're not there yet. There's still differences on the nutrition portions of the bill and a couple of other areas. The Senate is taking action on their side, but I'm hopeful that if not before our August recess in September, we'll be able to produce that bipartisan farm bill.
I definitely want to get to that more in our next segment, Congressman. Up next, we'll be talking a little bit more about the national and international issues that Congress is dealing with. Welcome back to the Maddy Report. We're being joined by Congressman Jim Costa to discuss some of the federal issues and their impacts in the San Joaquin Valley. Congressman, thanks for joining us. I'd really like to dive into some of the foreign affairs issues that are going on right now. Specifically, I know on the mind of a lot of Americans is the conflict in Ukraine, Israel and Gaza, and then also in Armenia. Could you talk a little bit about these conflicts and how does it impact the San Joaquin Valley?
Well, it impacts the San Joaquin Valley and impacts our entire country and the world we live in. I'm a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, and I'm on the subcommittee on Europe, and I have been involved in these issues for a long time. I've been to Kiev, Ukraine 3 times in the last 18 months. I was just there in February, and in April I spent almost a week in Israel. We are living, I believe, in a seminal moment in American and world history. And people are saying, I don't think we teach history so well these days. But what do you mean by a seminal moment? Well, World War II, the Depression, is a seminal moment in the 20th century. In the 1960s, we lost 58,000 Americans in Vietnam. We had the Civil Rights Movement. We had riots in American cities. The 2 Kennedy brothers were assassinated, and Dr. King. That was a seminal time in American and world history. The events that have happened in the last several years with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with the situation in China, these are our adversaries. And it's really the fate, ultimately, I think, of Western democracies and whether or not America is going to remain the beacon of light around the world for the freedoms that we share and cherish. The whole effort that began with the Marshall Plan and after World War II, and then NATO, which we supported, and then the founding of the European Union, has really created an opportunity for Europe and ourselves and our allies in Asia to create the longest peacetime period in Europe up until Russia's invasion of Ukraine in over 1,000 years. Think about it. Between World War II and February 24th, 2022, that had been the longest peacetime period in Europe in over 1,000 years. President Putin is a war criminal. He has bombed schools and hospitals. He's abducted over 50,000 Ukrainian children to Russia. And he really believes that Ukraine is a part of Russia. And so for Europe, for members of NATO, Poland, Romania, these countries, they clearly know what it's like to live under the Soviet Union and communism. So this is a seminal moment. And our initial support, solidifying NATO, Finland and Sweden to become a part of NATO, unthinkable 2 years ago, unthinkable. NATO today is stronger than it's been since the Cold War. Consequently, that national defense package that we passed finally in late April, should have been passed 5 months ago, provides the support for Ukraine, provides the support for Israel, and also the horrific humanitarian impacts to the people in Gaza who are suffering from Hamas. But over 118,000 Armenians that are refugees because Azerbaijan has removed them from their historic home in Nagorno-Karabakh. And of course Taiwan, I should say, that is under the threat of China. And so the world's watching. They're watching whether or not America is going to continue to stand up for democracies around the world. And that's why this is so important.
Certainly. And we've got about a minute left in this segment, but if you just wanted to touch on, you mentioned earlier getting legislation through the House. And I think we're talking about some of these large conflicts right now. You know, you're a member of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. How does the caucus play a role in some of these discussions? And do you think that these issues will rally members of Congress together?
Well, I certainly hope so. It used to be on these issues that politics in America ended, they used to say, at the water's edge. In other words, when it came to the international issues, we were all together. That's not so much the case anymore. The Problem Solvers plays an important role because it's a bipartisan group, equal number of Democrats and Republicans, and we come together on issues that we can agree upon. And I think that really sets the stage for the sensible sinner to reach enough agreement on both sides of the aisle to get difficult pieces of legislation passed.
Certainly. Up next, we'll dive into some of the Congressman's day-to-day responsibilities and legislative agenda. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back to the Maddy Report. I want to dive in, Congressman, to a little bit about your day-to-day responsibilities. A lot of folks watching our program may not know what it means to be a congressman, what those day-to-day responsibilities look like. Could you touch on what does that look like, day-to-day, serving the needs of the 21st Congressional District? What does a representative in Congress do?
Well, I have the honor and the privilege, the opportunity to help people every day, help people in our district on issues big and small, whether it deals with veterans or whether it's seniors or trying to help the city of Reedley with that incident on the illegal lab, are focusing on infrastructure projects. I'm especially very involved in efforts to invest in our water infrastructure, transportation, focusing on getting a medical school here in our valley. It's been a body of work for me over years, both when I was in Sacramento and now here. And as a Congress member, my staff and I get a chance to help people every day. I say no problem too big or too small as long as it has merit. And helping a veteran get an adjustment on their disabilities or recover medals that they thought were long lost, focusing on trying to ensure that a Medicare payment is properly made for a senior. These are all the kinds of, I call it vegetable soup of sorts. But the fact is that this valley has been my home, like for families throughout generations, 3 generations in my case, farming in this valley for 114 years. The diversity and the secret sauce of our valley is the story of America. Immigrants past, immigrants present. And every group of immigrants has added value, and we see it enriched in our valley and the people that live here.
That's a great point. I want to touch on a little bit about, you mentioned your tenure of service in Congress, and you've certainly seen a lot of changes over the years, both in the California legislature when you served there and also in Congress. How have you seen those bodies shift and change over time? Have they in any way, or are they largely the same as they were when you started?
No, they have changed. They've changed in a lot of ways that reflect the challenges we have in our society today. There used to be a lot more bipartisanship when Ken, Maddy, and I were working in Sacramento in the state legislature. It's gotten to be in the last decade or two where the partisanship, the fierce partisanship for many people, not for myself, but for others, determines what they do every day and how they vote. I represent the people of the Valley, and I think having two good, strong political parties has been the tradition of American politics. However, when you have a situation with social media, where you have a situation in which the politics of fear and division are played up through podcasts, in a divisive sort of way, it does not engender the ability for people to work together. And I think the majority of my constituents just want us to solve problems and to get things done. And so this hyper-inflated partisanship. And I'll say one other thing, and you see it a lot in Congress, what I call performative politics. Performative politics, as opposed to working in committee and with your colleagues and making changes and getting the art of the political compromise, we got some members that will try to figure out, if not every day, every week, what is the most outrageous thing they can do or say in committee or on the floor without any constructive nature, but only to build their social media platform in which they also raise money for. That's not what an elected representative in my mind is supposed to do. And you know the members that I'm talking about, Moscow Marjorie and some of the others in that category. It's what outrageous thing or performative political act can I do on social media that's going to create an uproar? And then that will increase my social media, and then I can use it to raise more contributions at $25, $30, $40. And that's what's wrong today, in my view, in terms and why a lot of people are just frustrated, with Congress, as they should be. I'm frustrated with it.
It certainly could be, and hopefully the Maddy Institute also seeks to be able to aid some of that partisan division and try to resolve it. We're going to take a quick break. Welcome back to the Maddy Report. We're talking with Congressman Jim Costa. Congressman, members of Congress are tasked with passing legislation that impacts the entire country and the nation. Can you talk a little bit about your personal legislative priorities, not only in this session of Congress, but some of the things that you've been working on throughout your tenure over the years? Yes.
Well, I, as I said, view it as a body of work, and both from my days in Sacramento and now in Washington, D.C. And, I've always been focused on infrastructure. For too long, we've been living off the investments our parents and grandparents made a generation or two ago in water, in transportation, in education, and we can just look around this valley. So that's why I'm very pleased that in recent years, we've been able to invest in the bipartisan infrastructure package, $1.7 trillion, significant. We're seeing these investments take place now in water. We are going to do a ribbon cutting in June here for the rehabilitation of the Bryant-Kern Canal. It had degraded where it only could move 22% of the water it originally was designed to move. Reconstruction of the San Luis Reservoir, the BFSIS Dam, and to expand it to hold another 130,000 acre-feet of water. We're looking at the same thing for Pine Flat Dam, and we're looking at a host of other reservoirs, new ones, and expansion of existing ones. In addition to that, recharging our groundwater. Last year, for the first time, our water districts and farmers, we recharged 1.6 million acre-feet of water back into our underground supply. These are the kind of investments we need to make. With our highway systems, you see it, we've been able to get more of the 6 lanes completed along Madera between Avenue 17 and Avenue 12. We now have the money to the river. We're doing the work between Fowler and Selma and Kingsburg. We're looking at expanding 41. Our intercity rail and our high-speed rail as well are investments. The Inflation Reduction Act also provides tools to deal with improving our air quality and making a transition to less emissions of mobile sources, which will clean up our air in the valley, which is very important, so that we become no longer have that non-attainment status. There are efforts with the medical school. I just had Secretary of Health and Human Services Javier Becerra last Monday. We've got this project with the University of California, San Francisco, one of the top medical schools in the entire country, therefore the world. We did the groundbreaking at UC Merced for a medical science building to do a sharing with faculty from UCSF at UC Merced, and using the residency program here in Fresno to really establish a full-fledged medical school. We have a great shortage, sadly, of physicians and nurses, and we're working on both of those efforts with our community colleges, our state university at Fresno, to plus up our nursing program. I think if this pandemic has taught us anything, besides never to politicize a international world health crisis, is that we need to focus on making sure we have the good physicians and nurses we need to have in our valley and in underserved areas throughout the country. So those are among the priorities: investing in our infrastructure, water and transportation, and broadband, I might add. You know, we had a lot of families during the pandemic, again, with trying to have telemedicine or telelearning. And, you know, that's hard enough, but if you don't have access to broadband, families driving in their cars to a local library to find a hotspot so their kids could do their lessons. And so, you know, it's like the 1930s, Jim Clyburn, my friend, says, when Franklin Roosevelt passed the Rural Electrification Act because they thought no American should be without electricity. Well, today, in this day and age, no American should be without access to broadband.
Certainly. We've only got a few seconds left. Is there anything else you want to share with our viewers today on the Maddy Report, Congressman?
Well, I just want to say that to get these big things are hard to do. You know, people are impatient. But working on the investments we're making today is investing in the future of America. And that's why it's so critical. And our schools are an important opportunity. I visited my grammar school recently, Houghton Kearney Elementary, and I told all the students there, you know, I went to the same classrooms. It was deja vu all over again, as Yogi Bear once said, but a flood of memories came back about those formative years of little Jimmy Costa, you know, and kindergarten through the 8th grade in that same school site. I told the kids how important it was, and those teachers, those first 9 teachers that saw something in me and my classmates and dedicated their lives to the education of America. And that's what we got to do. We got to educate the future of America. And we got to learn at the end of the day, and the Maddy Institute is a perfect for them, that whatever differences we have in this country among one another on issues and politics, remember the common bonds that we share as Americans in the belief in the faith of our country, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, these things that are inherent in what the beacon of light of democracy is.
That's a great point to end on, Congressman. Thank you so much for joining the Maddy Report today.
Always good.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for joining the Maddy Report. To learn more about the Maddy Institute, visit our website at maddyinstitute.com. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's episode of the Maddy Report, please visit our website at maddyinstitute.com.